Starscream was never meant to be a clown. He was built to be a king, but inside him lived a whisper darker than any Decepticon order. You'll never be enough. That whisper hollowed him, drove him, turned ambition into treachery, not madness, but a desperate shortcut to silence the fear inside him. And every time he reached the throne, the same truth struck. The crown didn't shield him, it reduced him to ash and scrap. This is Disassembled Heroes and Villains, and today we descend into the story of the Air Commander who reached for the throne and became the architect of his own downfall. This is the story of Starscream. But to understand how Starscream fell, you have to understand how high he could have risen, because the great tragedy of his life isn't the betrayals, or the failures, or even the throne he could never hold. It's that before he became a punchline, before the cowardice, the coups, the desperate grasping for power, Starscream was something Cybertron rarely produces. A mind sharp enough to change the world, and a spark hungry enough to try. He wasn't built to grovel, he wasn't born to kneel, he was designed by function, by talent, by sheer potential to lead. But potential without virtue becomes volatility, and brilliance without grounding becomes ambition unmoored. Starscream's ambition isn't the problem, it's what he builds that ambition on, and that story begins here. Before Starscream became the galaxy's favorite traitor, he was something far more dangerous. He was exceptional. Because long before fandom turned him into a meme, Cybertron knew him as part of its most elite warriors, the Seekers. On Cybertron, the Seekers weren't just soldiers, they were the apex, precision, speed, strategic dominance, embodied in frames that ruled the skies. Their silhouettes alone could end battles before they began, and Starscream wasn't merely one of them, he commanded them. But what most forget, what most never knew, is that Starscream's brilliance didn't begin in the battlefield's smoke or Megatron's shadow. It began in a laboratory. In some continuities, Starscream was a pre-war scientist, most famously in G1 with Skyfire, and again in the Energon universe. A mind shaped by experimentation and transformation physics. He questioned Cybertron's systems. He wasn't built for obedience, he was built to challenge assumptions, and that mind didn't disappear when the war began. It evolved. Across G1, Prime, and IDW, Starscream is repeatedly framed as one of the most strategically perceptive Decepticons. He sees angles Megatron dismisses. He spots political vulnerabilities before they spark rebellions. He understands leverage, not just military, but social, ideological, governmental. Where Megatron crushes obstacles, Starscream circumvents them. Where Megatron dominates through force, Starscream shapes outcomes through influence. He doesn't just read the battlefield, he reads the room. And here's the part many overlook. A shocking amount of Starscream's critiques of Megatron are valid. Megatron's brutality creates enemies faster than it creates victories. His refusal to delegate cripples Decepticon governance. His obsession with absolute dominance blinds him to diplomacy, reform, and long-term stability. Starscream doesn't invent these flaws, he suffers under them. And in universes like IDW, his vision for Cybertron is not madness, it's genuine reform. The Senate was corrupt. Cybertron needed political evolution, not eternal war. Starscream saw this clearly. His ambition was never the problem. Ambition is capacity. Ambition is potential. Ambition is a God-given spark meant for creation, leadership, and transformation. But ambition must rest on a foundation. When anchored in virtue, ambition becomes leadership. When anchored in pride, ambition becomes destruction. Starscream could have been a statesman, a visionary, a leader Megatron should have feared for the right reasons, and in rare moments, Armada's honor, IDW's early governance, you glimpse who he might have become. But he builds his ambition on the wrong materials, not humility, not character. He builds it on fear, on insecurity, on the desperate belief that if he doesn't seize power, the universe will forget him. His ambition isn't the issue, it's what he builds that ambition on. Because pride turns creativity into manipulation. Pride turns vision into survivalism. Starscream doesn't want the throne to rule Cybertron. He wants it to silence the storm inside him. And that need transforms brilliance into volatility. It turns potential into self-destruction. It turns the genius nobody sees into the traitor everyone remembers. Before Starscream betrays anyone else, he betrays himself. And to understand how that betrayal begins, how brilliance fractures into instability, we must go deeper, not into the skies above Cybertron, but into the wound beneath those wings. Brilliance alone doesn't shape the spark, because beneath every calculation, every strategy, every perfectly timed betrayal, something else was forming inside Starscream, something corrosive. For all his potential, for all his talent, he lived in the shadow of a warlord. Every triumph was dismissed, every mistake punished, every attempt to rise was crushed under the weight of Megatron's certainty. And slowly, that pressure did what pressure always does. It exposed the fractures already there. For all his brilliance, all his potential, Starscream lived under a simple, brutal truth. Megatron did not reward excellence. Megatron controlled it. Across G1, Prime, and IDW, Megatron's leadership is defined by domination. He does not teach, he demands. He does not inspire, he terrifies. To live beneath Megatron is to breathe air thick with consequence, to walk through every cycle knowing that your worth is temporary and your life conditional. And Starscream, despite his pride, absorbed that message deeply. He needed validation from a bot who gave none. He hungered for recognition from a leader who saw only tools. He wanted worth in the eyes of a master who framed worth as weakness. Every insult, every backhand, every threat didn't just bruise armor. It etched itself into the frame beneath it. Starscream didn't betray Megatron because he hated him. He betrayed Megatron because he longed for the dignity Megatron refused to give. But that pain doesn't end there. In Transformers Prime, the cracks would continue to show. Megatron's emotional abuse doesn't stop when Starscream defects, it follows him. Starscream tries to recreate himself, tries to find a spine, a voice, an identity not tied to Megatron's shadow. He wants freedom, but without Megatron's shadow, he doesn't know who he is. And then we come to IDW, with the political humiliation he suffers, being dismissed, mocked, outmaneuvered, cuts deeper than any battlefield wound. Starscream wants to be seen as a legitimate leader, but every time he steps into the light, the voices in the Senate echo the voice he already hears inside himself: you're not enough. It's no coincidence that IDW's Starscream becomes increasingly paranoid after gaining power, because what terrifies him most isn't losing the throne, it's being exposed while sitting on it. The throne demands stability, the throne demands humility, the throne demands virtue, and Starscream learned none of this under Megatron, which brings us to the heart of Starscream's insecurity. His fear of insignificance. That fear shapes everything he does. It infects his ambition. It fuels his betrayals. It twists his brilliance into desperation. Starscream doesn't lust for power to rule. He seeks power to matter. To silence the gnawing dread that without the crown, without a title, without the spotlight, he has nothing at all. But recognition is not the same as worth. And Starscream never learned that difference. Where characters like Optimus root their identity in virtue, service, sacrifice, humility, Starscream builds his identity out of whatever scraps he can find. Validation from Megatron, status within the Decepticons, fear from subordinates, temporary victories, fleeting moments of dominance. None of it holds, none of it fills him, none of it lasts long enough to quiet the void inside. And here, the lessons that Starscream teaches us become clear. Identity without virtue is hollow. If you build your value on achievement, you become a slave to success. If you build your value on admiration, you become a prisoner of others' opinions. If you build your value on fear, you become the tyrant you once despised. Starscream's insecurity isn't weakness. It's fear pretending to be strength. It's the terrified spark of a bot who could have changed Cybertron, but could never change how he saw himself. And because he never healed that wound, never confronted the fear, never built a foundation stronger than ego, his brilliance had nowhere to go but inward, spiraling into the behavior that defines him across every universe. The betrayals, the paranoia, the self-sabotage. Before Starscream ever turned on Megatron, he was already turning on himself. But insecurity alone doesn't define him. It needs a catalyst, something powerful enough to merge brilliance with brokenness into something explosive. And that brings us to the moment insecurity becomes treachery, and treachery becomes destiny. Starscream's brilliance gave him potential. His insecurity gave him fear. But when those forces collide, something far more dangerous is born, because a bot who believes he deserves the throne and simultaneously believes he will never be enough to sit on it will reach for the only path that promises to close the gap instantly: treachery. Not patience, not virtue, not the slow work of becoming worthy, the shortcut, the workaround. The fantasy that if he can leapfrog the pain, skip vulnerability, avoid exposure, he can finally quiet the voice inside that tells him he is nothing without power. Here, Starscream's story transforms. Brilliance becomes sabotage. Fear becomes strategy, and the crown becomes an idol promising salvation while silently delivering slavery. Because treachery is Starscream's twisted hope, the shortcut he thinks will silence the fear. Now we follow him to the moment Brilliance fractures into betrayal, again and again and again. There is a moment in Starscream's life, repeated across continuities, when the genius we saw in the laboratory, in the skies, and in the council chambers collides with the wounds he can never learn to heal. And that collision gives birth to the sin that defines him, treachery. People laugh at it, reduce it to comic relief, but the truth is darker. Starscream doesn't betray Megatron because he enjoys it. He betrays Megatron because in his mind, it's the only path left. It's the place where his brilliance and his brokenness finally meet. Every betrayal begins with a single spark. If I don't take the power now, I'll never be worthy of it. To Starscream, the throne isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline, a cure for the terror whispering that he'll never matter unless he rises above everyone else. When he looks at Megatron, he doesn't see a command, he sees a ceiling, a reminder of everything he will never be. So he reaches for the only tool he believes he has left. Treachery is self-preservation. If Megatron remains in power, Starscream remains in the shadow that has suffocated him for millennia. Every coup collapses for the same reason. Starscream wants the crown, but he refuses the cross. He wants authority without discipline, victory without sacrifice, recognition without virtue. And the moment he seizes the throne, the moment his ambition finally wins, his insecurity rises and consumes him from within. He second-guesses allies. He imagines plots that don't exist. He rules from fear instead of wisdom. In every universe, his plans don't fail because Megatron is stronger. They fail because Starscream cannot rule the storm without himself. If betrayal ruins his life once, shouldn't he learn? But he doesn't. And why? Because treachery isn't a strategy, it's an addiction. The moment before a coup, the fantasy of triumph, that's the only time he feels alive. Hope spikes, fear quiets. For a breath, he becomes the bot he always believed he could be. And like any addiction, he chases that feeling long after the consequences have carved scars he cannot hide. And Starscream cannot confront the scars beneath those wings. He cannot face unworthiness, so instead of dealing with the fire inside him, he sets fire to the world around him. Treachery becomes anesthetic, a way to numb the ache of his significance, a way to avoid admitting he doesn't want to be feared. He wants to be seen. It's easier to betray Megatron than to confront the frightened spark staring back from the mirror. And beneath it all, one fact remains. Treachery promises salvation, but will deliver slavery. It whispers you don't need virtue, you don't need humility, you don't need to grow, just take the throne, then you'll be whole. But the moment he grasps it, the lie unravels. The throne doesn't silence his fear, it amplifies it. The crown doesn't redeem him, it exposes him. Because every time Starscream betrays Megatron, he isn't climbing towards greatness, he is running from the truth he cannot bear, and this leads to the inevitable descent that he always faces. Before Starscream ever became Megatron's enemy, before the coups, the schemes, the usurpations, he became something far more tragic. A prisoner of the shortcuts he mistook for salvation. And once that pattern takes hold, it replicates across every universe. Rise, doubt, sabotage, fail. The cycle repeats again and again, because treachery is Starscream's twisted hope. The shortcut he thinks will silence the fear, but every shortcut has a cost, and the bill comes due in G1, where the pattern begins to form his legend. And nowhere is the cost of that pattern clearer than in the universe where it first became legend. Because before IDW gave us the politician, before Prime gave us the survivor, before Armada gave us the martyr, G1 gave us the loop. The place where his brilliance met his blindness, at its most distilled. A universe where every coup, every betrayal, every grasp for the throne plays out with ritual inevitability. He rises, he falls, he denies the failure, he begins again. Audiences learn to laugh, to see it as slapstick, as predictable rhythm, but beneath the humor lies something heavier. A bot trying so hard to escape his fear that he ends up orbiting it forever. And nowhere is that orbit clearer than in the Starscream who started it all. This brings us to G1, the blueprint of the loop he can't escape. When most people think of Starscream, they think of G1, the version where every flaw and impulse is painted in bright colors, across a Saturday morning battlefield. But beneath the humor lies the prototype of a tragedy. G1 Starscream isn't foolish. He's caught in a loop. From the beginning, he has two extremes: tactical brilliance and emotional blindness. He spots weaknesses Megatron ignores. He sees the opportunities no other Decepticon even notices. And in Starscream's brigade and the Revenge of Bruticus, his plans aren't ridiculous, they're effective. He builds an army, he nearly wins. And every time his star begins to rise, his insecurity pulls him back down. He overplays his hand, he misreads loyalty, he assumes Megatron will fall as quickly as he does. And when Megatron returns, fury in his voice, contempt in his optics, defiance, panic, kneeling. It's not cowardice, it's a pattern. G1 makes the cycle unmistakable. Rise, fall, denial, repeat. He rises, convinced this time is different. He falls, undone by the same fear he refuses to face. He denies, blaming circumstances and sabotage, and then he starts again, sure one more betrayal will finally fill the void inside him. The tragedy is that Megatron almost never kills him. And why? Because Megatron understands the loop too. Starscream is useful, predictable, a lightning rod for Ascent, a tool whose ambition can be directed or crushed on command. And so the cycle continues, not because Starscream is foolish, but because he never learns to break the pattern that defines his existence. The humor is the mask, the loop is the truth. Every coup is a cry for validation, every collapse is a reminder the throne cannot redeem him, every return to Megatron's feet a confession that Starscream still believes power is the only cure for his fear. G1 doesn't mock Starscream, it reveals who he is. A bot brilliant enough to conquer worlds, yet wounded enough to sabotage victory the moment he grasps it. Until he confronts the wound, G1 Starscream will always be exactly where the loop leaves him, reaching, failing, and repeating. G1 shows us the loop, the rise, the fall, the denial, the repeat. A bot orbiting his own fear, forever chasing a crown that can't save him. But across the multiverse, there is one Starscream, a rare, fragile deviation, where the loop cracks, where the mask slips, where something startling appears beneath the arrogance and the fear. A longing for honor, a hunger for meaning, a spark that wants to be more than Megatron's shadow. That version lives in Armada. Here, Starscream's not the schemer or the usurper. He is the warrior who wants to matter, the soldier who wants to be seen, the seeker who wants a purpose worthy of his pain. And for the first time in his long, fracturing story, he reaches for something higher than the throne. Armada gives us the Starscream who almost breaks free, not by grasping for power, but by discovering the worth Megatron always denied. This brings us to the Starscream who didn't just survive, he dared to hope. If G1 shows us the loop that traps Starscream, Armada shows us the version who tries, truly tries, to break it. Because Armada Starscream is driven by something deeper than ambition. He wants honor, he wants meaning, he wants a life that amounts to more than Megatron's contempt. And for the first time in any major continuity, Starscream's hunger for worth isn't twisted into treachery, it's revealed as longing. In Armada, Megatron's cruelty doesn't make Starscream cunning, it wounds him, deeply, repeatedly. Every time Megatron calls him useless, the same message is beaten into him. You are nothing unless someone powerful says otherwise. But unlike G1, Starscream finally encounters someone who challenges that lie, the Autobots. Not because they flatter him, not because they manipulate him, but because, for the first time, someone treats him with dignity. And when Starscream glimpses respect, friendship, worth, his worldview begins to fracture. His desires shift. He no longer wants to rule, he wants to matter. He wants a purpose Megatron cannot give him, a calling Megatron cannot see, a life Megatron would never allow. And that shift leads to the most shocking decision any Starscream has made, self-sacrifice. When Starscream turns on Megatron, not for power, not for a throne, but to stop the war and save innocence, he becomes something no previous version of him dared to be, a warrior willing to die for something greater than himself. And in that moment, he breaks the loop. He rises without betraying, he chooses honor over ambition. He proves, if only for a breath, that his spark was capable of more than scheming and fear. It's why millions still point to Armada Starscream as the definitive version, because he's the version who almost healed. But the tragic fact still remains. He finds inner worth in the moment he loses his life. He nearly becomes the bot he was always meant to be, but only by dying to save others. and that is the truth that Armada leaves us with. Starscream isn't condemned, he's simply afraid to believe in better, until the moment he finally does. Before we step away from the Seeker who wanted honor, and found it only in the moment he fell, follow Disassembled Heroes and Villains on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Each week, we peel back the armor of the icons who shaped us, and ask what their rise, wounds, and downfall reveal about who we become. Next week, we turn from the warrior who wanted to matter, to a hero who never wanted the spotlight at all. A man who trained until his hair fell out, a man who broke the limits of strength, and found the emptiness waiting on the other side. If Starscream is the fear of never being enough, Saitama is the horror of being too much. Next Friday, we dive into One Punch Man, a story of power, purpose, and the meaning of struggle in a world where one punch ends every battle. Now, back to the Seeker who mistook the throne for salvation, Starscream. Armada shows us the Starscream who almost healed, the Seeker who reached for worth instead of power, and found meaning in the moment he let go. But most universes are not that merciful. Across the multiverse, there is one stage, one continuity, where Starscream finally gets everything he ever wanted. The throne, the authority, the title, the power he clawed towards for millennia. And instead of saving him, it destroys him. Not through war, not through Megatron, but through himself. Because the moment Starscream becomes the ruler of Cybertron, something terrifying happens. The spotlight turns, the masks fall, and the throne forces him to face the one enemy he can't outfly, outwit, or overthrow, his own reflection. The kingdom he seizes, the crown he coveted, the cross he refuses to carry, the Starscream who proves he didn't fear losing power, he feared being seen. There's a moment in IDW that defines Starscream more clearly than any coup attempt, any insult, any throne room meltdown across the multiverse. Not when he seizes power, but when he realizes power won't save him. Because in IDW, Starscream finally wins. He becomes the ruler of Cybertron, chosen, reluctantly, by the people. Validated by political necessity, backed by alliances, at last, the throne is his. This was supposed to heal him. The moment he silences the whispers saying he has nothing unless he sits above everyone else. But the crown doesn't quiet the voice, it amplifies it. Starscream's ascent in IDW isn't fluke, luck, or trickery, it's competence. Early in Robots in Disguise, he demonstrates genuine political brilliance. He builds coalitions, he navigates post-war Cybertron with an agility no other leader shows. He recognizes Autobots, Decepticons, and neutrals all need a future bigger than old grudges. He even turns former enemies into partners. For a brief, startling moment, his potential is visible, not just to us, but to Cybertron. He could have been a great leader. He could have guided a world out of ruin, and in those early cycles, he actually tries. But trying requires virtue, humility, the one thing he's never possessed. Starscream's rule begins with competence. It ends with fear. Not fear of Megatron, not Optimus, not Windblade, not the Council. Fear of exposure. Because IDW forces Starscream into the one position he cannot survive, a leader under public scrutiny. Every meeting, every vote, every advisor, every civilian, eyes everywhere. No shadows to hide his insecurity, no Megatron to absorb blame, no battlefield hierarchy to insulate his ego. Just him, and the terrifying possibility that if Cybertron sees him clearly, they will see what he sees. A bot unworthy of the power he holds. So he compensates, he tightens his grip, he isolates himself, he replaces trust with surveillance, advisors into enemies, friends into threats. He builds an intelligence network not to protect Cybertron, but to protect his image. And the more he fears exposure, the more paranoid he becomes. Windblade challenges his authority, threat. Ironhide questions his judgment, threat. The public wants transparency, threat. Truth becomes attacked, disagreement, treason. Because if the throne is a mirror, Starscream cannot bear what it reflects. Starscream's greatest enemy isn't Megatron, or Optimus, or Windblade, or the Electorate. His greatest enemy is the gap between who he wants to be and who he believes he is. He wants to be a visionary, but believes he's a fraud. He wants to be a savior, but believes he's a sinner. He wants to lead, but believes leadership will reveal him. So to protect himself, he sabotages himself. He destroys trust to avoid vulnerability. He manufactures crises to avoid accountability. He manipulates the council to avoid measurement. He doesn't ruin his rule out of folly, but fear. In IDW, Starscream is not a tyrant by design. He is a tyrant by fear. There was a moment, until all are one, where Starscream stands in the council chambers, surrounded by a government he built, and he looks miserable. Not calculating, not overwhelmed, not triumphant, just miserable. Because the throne he spent a millennia grasping for has become the thing he fears most. A position demanding humility, service, and transparency. The cross he refuses again and again. The parallel is unmistakable. The crown without a cross becomes a curse. Authority without sacrifice corrupts. Power without humility destroys. Leadership without virtue collapses. Starscream wanted the crown, not the burden. The title, not the accountability. Exaltation, but not exposure. So the throne becomes a prison. Not because Cybertron demands too much, but because the crown forces him to confront the truth he spent a millennia fleeing. You can't rule Cybertron. You can't rule yourself. Nothing in IDW symbolizes his fracture more vividly than Bumblebee's ghost. It's not a haunting, not a vision, not a trick. It's his conscience, the part of him that still longs for connection, goodness, and redemption, and he cannot silence it. He shows up in the quiet between decrees, asking who he's really trying to save. The ghost appears when Starscream is vulnerable, defensive, or self-justifying, and names the questions he won't ask. It speaks the truth he refuses to hear. It reminds him of everything he pretends not to care about, and everything he secretly does. Bumblebee's ghost is the mirror he cannot manipulate, the voice he cannot bury, the truth he cannot outrun, because deep down, Starscream knows he is capable of good, but goodness requires sacrifice, surrender, and humility. The cross he refuses. Starscream rule doesn't end in glory, it ends in conviction. It ends in confession, written in his paranoia, his spirals, his desperation to control the world that never asked him to be perfect. Because IDW reveals the heart of his tragedy. He didn't fear losing power, he feared being seen. Seen for his insecurity, seen for his shame, seen for his longing, seen for the potential that frightens him as much as his failures. The throne didn't break him, the mirror did. Starscream could have been Cybertron's great reformer, the bridge between factions, the leader who turned war into peace, but that future required vulnerability, and he couldn't bear it. So the crown becomes his curse, the throne his mirror, and the ghost his conscience. Because IDW proves, once and for all, Starscream never feared losing power, he feared being seen. IDW leaves us with the image of a ruler undone not by war, not by rebellion, not by the enemies he spent a lifetime outmaneuvering, but by himself. Because once the mask falls, when the crown becomes a mirror, Starscream is forced to face the truth he spent every universe avoiding. The enemy was never Megatron, never Optimus, never the Council, the public, or the throne. It was the fear inside his own spark. Fear of inadequacy, fear of exposure, fear of becoming nothing in the moment he stops grasping. And that brings us to the final question. Not who Starscream is, but what his story reveals about us. The ambition, the insecurity, the pride, the longing for worth that no crown can satisfy. The lesson is unmistakable. Starscream shows us that the enemy inside us is always stronger than the one in front of us. When you strip away the battles, the coups, the theatrics, the Starscream we're left with is strangely familiar. Not because we share his ambitions or his betrayals, but because underneath the armor and the arrogance, something deeply human. A spark that wants to matter and doesn't know how. His story shows us that ambition, on its own, isn't dangerous. Ambition can lift worlds, it can rebuild nations, it can turn a miner into a monster, but when ambition isn't anchored in character, when it grows without humility, without honesty, without the slow work of becoming whole, it destroys the very bot who carries it. Starscream doesn't fall because Megatron overwhelms him. He falls because the foundation he builds on can hold the weight of what he wants, and beneath that collapses insecurity, working like a magnifying glass held over his pride. Everything he fears gets louder, everything he doubts becomes sharper. His ego isn't confidence, it's insulation, a way to hide the terrified truth that he's never believed he was worthy of anything he reached for. The louder he boasts, the more fragile he becomes. That fragility is why treachery calls to him, not as a thrill, not even as a strategy, but as something that feels like salvation. For a brief moment, right before the coup, right before the blade, he feels powerful, whole, almost worthy. but it's a counterfeit cure, a shortcut that promises healing but only deepens the wound. He keeps reaching for the same poison answer because it's easier than confronting the fear inside him. And when he finally gains real power, IDW shows us what happens when leadership outpaces humility. Authority becomes tyranny when the person holding it cannot bear to be vulnerable. Starscream doesn't rule through cruelty, he rules through fear. Fear of exposure, fear of scrutiny, fear that the throne will reveal what the battlefield never could. Leadership demands openness, transparency, and service. And Starscream can't give any of that without feeling like he's being stripped bare. Because his identity was never rooted in who he was, only in what he could achieve. An identity built on achievement collapses the moment achievement does. Every title, every stolen crown, none of it fills the hollow place inside him. Power cannot heal the soul. It can amplify it, distort it, expose it, but it cannot mend it. And beneath all of it, beneath the ego, the schemes, the hunger, sits a single truth. Pride isn't strength. Pride is fear. Pride is the shield he hides behind so no one can see how much he doubts, how deeply he longs, how desperately he wants to be worthy of the life he never learned to build. And when you trace every betrayal, every downfall, every version of this bot across the multiverse, the same truth stares back at you. The enemy inside us is always stronger than the one in front of us. Megatron wasn't the wall Starscream couldn't climb. Cybertron wasn't the world he couldn't rule. The throne wasn't the burden he couldn't bear. The only enemy he never learned to face was himself. Starscream's tragedy doesn't end with a throne room, a coup, or a confession. It ends with a mirror, one that shows us the enemy inside the spark, and what happens when fear outpaces character. But his story doesn't stay confined to G1, Armada, Prime, or IDW. It travels, it mutates, it survives. Because Starscream is more than a Decepticon. He's an archetype. The usurper, the schemer, the ambitious lieutenant who wants the crown but not the calling. The voice that whispers you deserve more, and the fear that answers back you'll never be enough. Every era reinterprets him, every generation recognizes him, every viewer sees themselves in his grasping, reaching, failing arc. And that brings us to the question behind the character. Why does Starscream endure? Why does this traitor, this aspirant, this broken genius remain one of the most compelling figures in all of Transformers history? To answer that, pull back the lens, beyond continuity, beyond canon, into the myth where his legacy lies. Across every universe, every reboot, every retelling, Starscream appears again, not because the franchise needs a traitor. He isn't simply a villain, he's a shape we recognize, a shadow we know. Starscream is the eternal usurper, the lieutenant who believes he should be king, the strategist who thinks he's smarter than the throne, the spark who thinks destiny owes him, if he just reaches far enough. His archetype is older than Transformers, older than Cybertron, older than modern storytelling itself. He walks beside Iago, brilliant, observant, hollow. He echoes Judas, close to greatness, unable to bear what it demands. He shares Littlefinger's cunning, forever climbing, forever falling. He carries Loki's charm and wounded pride, the god who wants recognition more than victory. Why does the figure endure? Because the question he embodies never dies. What happens when ambition outgrows character? Starscream is the modern mirror of that fear. In offices, boardrooms, governments, industries, you can find a Starscream. Someone desperate to rise, terrified to be seen, certain they deserve more, and quietly afraid of what they'll become if they get it. He is the architect of ambition without virtue. We recognize the sharp smile, the calculation behind the optics. We recognize the hunger, because at some point, we felt it too. That longing to matter, that ache for recognition, that whisper that you should be more than this. But Starscream reveals the danger in that longing. When worth is sought externally, it becomes an endless, bottomless pit, a throne that rises as soon as you climb it. And that's why the audience loves him, not despite his failures, but because of them. Starscream is relatable in ways Megatron and Optimus never can be. Optimus is who we want to be. Megatron is who we fear we could become. Starscream is who we are when we feel overlooked, underestimated, and unseen. He is the part of us that wants the reward without the responsibility, the influence without the sacrifice, the crown without the cross. He's the spark that wonders, if I had more, would I finally feel whole? And that makes his tragedy universal, because Starscream doesn't fail for a lack of intelligence, or a lack of strength, or potential. He fails because he cannot do the one thing every mythic hero must do, face himself. Every betrayal refuses to look inward. He reaches for the world to avoid reaching within, and that's why his legacy continues to endure. He is the warning written in every age. You can conquer the world and still lose the war inside your soul. You can seize the throne and still collapse under the weight of your own fear. You can silence your enemies and still be broken by the voice you carry inside. Starscream endures because he's timeless, because he's tragic, because he's us. Ambitious, afraid, reaching for crowns we're not ready to carry. And until we learn the lesson he never could, his story will keep repeating, across continuities, across generations, across every mirror we dare to look into. Because Starscream is more than a Decepticon, he's the reminder that the battle outside of us are as dangerous as the ones burning within. Thank you for walking with me into the spark of Starscream. To understand him, you can't start with the coups, the throne rooms, or the blade hidden behind the oath. You have to go back. Back to the brilliant seeker built for the skies. Back to the scientist who wanted to reshape Cybertron. Back to the bot who believed, deep down, that if he wasn't extraordinary, he was nothing at all. Because everything Starscream becomes, the traitor, the politician, the would-be king, begins with that wound. A spark convinced worth must be taken, because it will never be fully given. Across continuities, failed uprising, desperate grasp for power, that wound never heals. It only deepens, and the deeper it gets, the louder it speaks. It tells him that ambition can replace character, that recognition can replace identity, that the crown can replace the cross, and Starscream believes it because the alternative terrifies him. Humility requires honesty, redemption requires surrender, healing requires letting yourself be seen, and in IDW, when he finally sits on the throne he's chased for millennia, he discovers the truth he was never prepared to face. Power cannot quiet the soul, it only turns up the volume. The crown he coveted becomes the mirror he fears. The throne he sees becomes the burden he hates. The world he rules becomes the world that finally sees him as he is. And under that light, he breaks. Because Starscream's tragedy isn't simply that he falls. He knows what he should be and cannot bear the cost of becoming it. He could have been a reformer, a visionary, a bridge between factions, a leader forged not through terror, but through wisdom and humility. But pride stands where virtue should. Fear stands where courage should. Shame stands where redemption could have taken root. And so his story ends where it began, not with Megatron, not betrayal, not the throne, but the enemy inside his own spark. Could Starscream be redeemed if he dared to believe he was worthy of redemption? Because in the end, the tragedy of Starscream isn't that he fell, it's that he could have flown. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear it. Which Starscream shaped you the most, and why? Drop a comment, let's keep this conversation going. And if you want more deep dives like this, hit subscribe. We're just getting started. So stay sharp, stay grounded, and as always, stay handsome. And remember, pride is the fall before the fall.